The hall had gone silent, every eye fixed on the rancher who dared to hold a saloon girl's hand. A drunk stepped forward, voice sharp as a knife. "She doesn't belong here, not in this town, not in your arms." The crowd laughed, cruel and loud. Clara's face burned, shame pressing down like a weight. But Jack Holloway didn't let go. He pulled her closer, his voice cut through the noise. "If she falls, I fall with her." Gasps filled the room. Whispers turned to outrage. Dustwood would never forgive what they had just seen. And yet, that single night would change everything for Jack, for Clara, and for the town that tried to bury them both. Welcome to WestDream Tales, where the untold tales of the Wild West come alive. Stories of love, betrayal, and redemption in a land where every choice could cost everything. The land stretched wide and silent. Dustwood sat on the edge of nowhere, a town clinging to dry soil and dying hopes. The prairie winds carried dust instead of promise. Jack Holloway lived a few miles out, on a ranch that felt too big for one man. 4 winters had passed since he buried his wife on the hill behind the barn. Her name was Sarah. Sarah with the golden hair and laugh like morning bells. The fever took her in 3 days. Jack held her hand as life slipped away, promising things he knew he couldn't keep. "I'll find you again," he whispered, "somewhere beyond this dust." But Sarah only smiled, weak as candlelight, and was gone. He never remarried. He barely spoke. He worked. He ate. He slept. The house still held her ghost, her apron hanging by the kitchen window, her books gathering dust on the shelf she'd built with her own hands. Jack couldn't bear to move them, couldn't bear to leave them be. Every morning, the same rhythm. Fix the fence, feed the cattle, watch the sun rise without warmth. The work kept his hands busy, but his heart remained buried on that hill. People in Dustwood said Jack was steady, reliable. "That Holloway boy's got grit," old-timers nodded over their coffee. "Lost his woman but kept his land." But behind the steady face was a man hollowed out by loss, a man who stopped looking for anything beyond survival. The ranch itself told stories of better days. Wooden posts his father had driven deep into the earth 30 years past. Corrals where Jack had learned to rope cattle as a boy, his father's rough hands guiding his own. The big house his parents built when the cattle brought good money, before the drought years, before the debts. Now it stood half empty, rooms closed off to save on firewood. The dining table sat 6, but Jack ate alone. The parlor where his mother once played piano gathered cobwebs in the corners. Even the barn felt too quiet, missing the laughter of hired hands who'd moved on to greener pastures. Dustwood itself wasn't much. A church with peeling paint and a bell that rang off key. A sheriff's office with a crooked sign and bars that hadn't held a prisoner in 2 years. The general store where Mrs. Patterson counted pennies twice and gossiped thrice. A blacksmith shop that doubled as the town's unofficial meeting place. And one saloon, its lanterns flickering long after midnight. The saloon was the only place with music. Rough music, drowned by clinking bottles and drunken laughter. Cowboys fresh from cattle drives spent their pay on whiskey and dreams. Merchants from back east wrinkled their noses but drank anyway. Local men escaped wives and worries, if only for a few hours. But sometimes, in the haze of smoke, a voice cut through. Her name was Clara Mayfield. She stood on the small wooden stage in a dress too bright for such a dim room. Red silk that had seen better years. Mended tears hidden by careful stitching. Her hair fell in dark waves past her shoulders, catching the lamplight. Her song carried a sorrow that no whiskey could drown. Clara had arrived in Dustwood 3 months ago on the afternoon stage. No baggage except a worn leather satchel and a guitar case held together with twine. She asked the saloon keeper, Big Tom Murphy, for work. "Can you sing?" he'd grunted, not looking up from polishing glasses. "Yes, sir." "Can you pour drinks without spilling?" "Yes, sir." "Can you handle men who've had too much to drink and too little sense?" Clara's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed steady. "I can handle myself." Big Tom looked her up and down, taking in the worn edges of her traveling dress, the proud set of her shoulders. "You got anywhere else to go, girl?" "No, sir." He nodded once. "Stage is yours, 7 nights a week. Room upstairs, meals included. But you keep the peace. Understand. Any trouble, you're gone. That first night, she'd climbed the stage with shaking hands. The crowd barely glanced up from their cards and bottles. She started with a hymn her mother taught her, voice thin and uncertain. By the third note, conversations died. By the chorus, even the card players had stopped to listen. Men laughed, jeered, shouted her name like a curse. They tossed coins at her feet, not as respect, but mockery. In Dustwood, a saloon girl was worth less than a horse. Sing something with more fire. Honey, how about you come down here and warm my lap instead? Louder. Girl can't hear you over my whiskey. Clara learned to smile through it all. The cruel laughter, the grabbing hands, the names they called her. She'd faced worse than small-town judgment before. But every night, she climbed those stage steps carrying a little less hope. But Clara's eyes told another story. Eyes that held storms. Storms she never spoke of. Eyes that hid a dignity the town refused to see. Those who looked closely might catch something else, a flash of steel beneath the sorrow. Clara Mayfield had not always been a saloon singer. Once, in another life, she'd worn silk because she chose to, not because it was all she had. The truth was locked away, buried deeper than Jack's grief. Clara's real name was Clara Whitmore, daughter of Judge Thomas Whitmore of St. Louis. She'd grown up in a mansion with servants and suitors, piano lessons and proper tea. But she'd also grown up with her father's drinking, her mother's laudanum, and a brother who gambled away the family fortune before putting a bullet in his head. When the creditors came, they took everything. The house, the furniture, even her mother's jewelry. Clara had $50 and a broken heart. She'd run west, changing her name at every stop, until the money ran out in Dustwood. One evening, Jack walked into the saloon. Not for drink, not for company. He had no reason, other than the loneliness pressing too hard that night. It was a Tuesday, the kind of empty evening that stretched like pulled taffy. He'd spent the day mending fence posts, replacing boards the winter wind had loosened. Simple work, but it left too much time for thinking. Too much time remembering Sarah's voice calling him in for supper. The saloon doors swung behind him with a sound like breaking branches. He leaned against the back wall, hat low, hands still calloused from ranch work. The room blurred with smoke and laughter. Conversations drifted past him like tumbleweeds. That new schoolmarm's got eyes for the preacher's boy. Cattle prices are dropping again. Won't be worth driving to Abilene. My wife's been after me to fix the roof. But hell, it ain't raining indoors yet. Then Clara began to sing. The song was Barbara Allen, old as heartbreak itself. Her voice was raw, not polished, not soft, but true. Jack lifted his head for the first time in months. He saw the crowd, restless, mocking, cards slapping on wooden tables, glasses clinking against bottlenecks, men leaning back in chairs, boots propped up, treating her voice like wallpaper. But his gaze fixed on her, on the way her hands trembled as she held the mic stand, yet her voice refused to break, on the slight lift of her chin when someone made a crude comment. On the way she closed her eyes during the saddest verses, as if the words cut too deep to sing with them open. Something shifted inside him. Not attraction, recognition. He knew grief when he saw it. The weight in her song felt too familiar. It was the sound of someone who had lost too much, yet kept breathing anyway. It was the sound of his own heart. If hearts could sing. Clara glanced across the room. For a second, their eyes met. His were gray-blue like storm clouds, steady beneath the brim of his hat. Hers were dark brown, wide with surprise at finding someone actually listening. She looked away quickly, as if caught stealing a secret. The song ended. Applause was scattered, half-hearted, laced with cruel whistles. That's enough sadness. Girls sing something with spirit. How about Oh Susanna, something a man can stomp to? Clara bowed, face composed, but her shoulders tight with shame. She started into Camptown races, her voice losing its soul but gaining the rhythm the crowd demanded. Jack left without a word, but the echo of her voice followed him through the dust, all the way back to the ranch. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams, wondering why a stranger's sorrow felt like his own. Outside, coyotes called across the prairie. Inside, silence pressed like a held breath. For the first time in 4 years, Jack Holloway dreamed of something other than graves. Days turned into weeks. Jack found reasons to ride into town more often. Supplies that could wait another month. Tools he already owned. Excuses thin as prairie grass. Each time, his steps slowed near the saloon. Each time, he heard Clara's voice from within. And each time, he lingered a little longer by the door. The music drifted through the walls, sometimes lively, sometimes mournful. Clara had learned to read the crowd, to match her songs to their moods. Friday nights called for drinking songs and dance tunes. Sunday afternoons, when guilt weighed heavy, she sang hymns. But late on weeknights, when only the loneliest men remained, she sang the songs that mattered. People noticed. They whispered. The widower Holloway had started looking at a saloon girl. Dustwood thrived on gossip. In a town where the biggest excitement was usually which cow had wandered into whose field, Jack's interest in Clara became front-page news. Men chuckled. Women frowned. Mothers warned their sons. That Clara girl's got her hooks in Jack Holloway, Mrs. Patterson announced to anyone who'd listen at the general store. Mark my words, she's after his ranch. Poor Sarah must be turning in her grave, clucked Mrs. Henderson, the preacher's wife. Jack was always steady, but grief makes fools of good men. A rancher could choose many wives, old-timer Ben Kowalski declared over checkers at the barbershop. But not her, not that kind. The consensus was clear. Jack could do better. Much better. Anyone better. Jack ignored them, or tried to, but their voices clung to him like burrs on a coat. Every sideways glance felt like judgment. Every hushed conversation that stopped when he entered a room added weight to his shoulders. Still, something drew him back. Not just Clara's voice, though it haunted his quiet evenings. It was the way she carried herself, the dignity she maintained despite the crowd's disrespect, the small kindnesses he'd started to notice, like the night he saw her give her dinner to a drunk who'd spent his last penny on whiskey, or the way she helped Big Tom clean tables after her performance. Never asked but always willing, or how she'd step between two cowboys about to draw guns over a card game. Her voice calm and steady until tempers cooled. You gentlemen came here to have a good time, she'd said, hands raised peacefully. Don't let pride ruin it. There'll be other card games, but there's only one of each of you. The men had laughed, sheepish, and bought each other drinks instead of drawing steel. Clara had possibly saved 2 lives that night, and no one even noticed. Except Jack. One night, he found himself standing outside the saloon after the show ended. Clara stepped out, coat thin against the October cold. Her breath made small clouds in the chill air. Her eyes widened when she saw him waiting. Neither spoke at first. The street was empty except for a few horses tied at hitching posts. Dust hung in the lamplight. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Then Jack tipped his hat. Evening, Miss Mayfield. Her lips parted, surprised at the respect in his tone. No one in Dustwood called her Miss. She was Clara to everyone, or girl, or worse, but never Miss, with the courtesy due a lady. She gave a faint smile. Evening, Mr. Holloway. It was nothing, a greeting under the stars, but for Jack, it was more than he'd allowed himself in years. The simple act of speaking to someone who wasn't trying to sell him something or asking about his cattle, he offered to walk her back. She hesitated, glancing around the empty street. Being seen with Jack Holloway would only fuel more gossip, but the night was cold, and she was tired of being afraid. She nodded, quietly. The walk to the boarding house took 5 minutes. They walked in comfortable silence, their footsteps falling into rhythm. Jack's boots were worn but well cared for. Clara's were newer but cheaper, the kind that pinched after a long evening on stage. Clara spoke first. You don't belong in there, you know. Her voice was low, almost bitter. Jack glanced at her, surprised by the bluntness. Why do you say that? She was quiet for several steps. Then, you listen when I sing? Really listen. Men like you don't usually... She trailed off, unable to finish. Jack stopped walking. Men like me. Clara's face tightened. Decent men. Men with reputations to protect. There was pain in her voice. old and deep. I've learned to tell the difference. Jack didn't press, but something in her tone made his chest ache. What had she endured before Dustwood? What had taught her that decency and attention were mutually exclusive? Maybe I don't belong there, he said finally. But neither do you. She stopped, startled by the certainty in his voice. Her eyes searched his face in the lamplight. I didn't choose this? The words hung between them like a confession. Jack nodded, understanding more than she expected. Few of us choose what we become, but we can choose what we do next. The walk ended too soon. She slipped inside the boarding house, eyes lowered, but at the door, she paused. Thank you for walking with me, for listening. Jack stood there a moment after she'd gone, hat in his hands. The prairie wind carried the scent of approaching winter. Above, stars burned in patterns Sarah used to name for him. But for the first time, he wasn't thinking of the past. From that night, something unspoken began. Not love, not yet. A recognition, like two shadows touching in the dark. Dustwood didn't see it, or maybe they did, and refused to admit it. But change had already taken root. Jack returned home, sat on the porch in silence. The prairie stretched out endless, but for the first time, it didn't feel empty. Her voice still lingered in the air, fragile but alive. And in that fragile note, a spark caught fire. The kind of fire that could either warm a man or burn the whole town down. But first, Dustwood would have its say, and Dustwood's judgment would be swift and merciless. The town had rules about men like Jack and women like Clara, rules carved in stone and enforced by whispers. Soon, those whispers would become shouts, and Jack Holloway would have to choose his place in Dustwood, or the woman who made him remember what it felt like to be alive. Whispers spread faster than prairie fire. One man had seen Jack walking Clara home. By morning, the story had twisted into scandal. At Kowalski's barber shop, men gathered early for coffee and gossip. Saw Jack Holloway escorting that saloon girl around like she was the preacher's daughter. Wouldn't surprise me none. Man's been alone too long. Makes him desperate. Sarah was a good woman. This is how he honors her memory. At the general store, women paused their talk when Jack walked in. Their eyes cut sharp. Their voices dropped to whispers that carried further than shouts. Mrs. Patterson made a show of turning her back, as if protecting her virtue from contamination. Mrs. Henderson clutched her shawl tighter and steered her daughter away from the counter. Jack picked up nails and flour, but the silence spoke louder than words. Children repeated what they heard at home. Don't look at the saloon girl. She's no better than the dust. And now, they added, don't trust the Holloway man either. The isolation cut deeper than Jack expected. He'd lived on the edges of Dustwood society since Sarah's death, but he'd never been cast out. Now, conversations died when he approached. Invitations stopped coming. Even the blacksmith, who'd shod Jack's horses for 10 years, barely grunted hello. Samuel Granger found him outside Murphy's Hardware, loading fence wire into his wagon. Tall, broad-shouldered. Samuel had been Jack's friend since boyhood. They'd learned to ride together, courted girls at the same church socials, served as each other's groomsmen. But now Samuel's eyes carried warning, not warmth. Jack, I heard things. You're walking Clara Mayfield around like she's a church lady. Jack tied down the wire, not looking up. I walked her home. Once. Is that a crime in Dustwood now? Samuel's jaw tightened. You know what this does to you? To your name? Your father built respect in this town. Your grandfather too. You want to throw all that away? Jack finally looked up, anger flashing in his gray eyes. My name ain't worth much if I can't speak to who I want. She's a saloon girl. Jack, a performer. They're different from us. Samuel struggled for words that wouldn't sound too harsh. You need a wife. I understand that. But there's decent women in this county. Women who'd make good mothers, good partners, women who'd bring honor to the Holloway name. Jack's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. What makes a woman decent, Sam? The clothes she wears, the stage she stands on, or the way she treats people when nobody's watching? Samuel shook his head, lips pressed hard. You're a Holloway. You've got land, respect, a future. Don't throw it all on a saloon girl's lap. She'll drag you down. Jack, Dustwood won't forgive. The words hit like hammer blows. Jack said nothing more, but the sting lingered long after Samuel walked away. His oldest friend had drawn a line in the dust. Choose Dustwood's approval or choose Clara, but not both. That evening, at the ranch, Martha Holloway waited on the porch. Jack's mother had lived in the small house behind the main ranch since his father died. Her hair had gone silver, but her spine stayed steel straight. Her voice could still cut glass when she was riled. "You saw her, didn't you?" She didn't look up from her knitting, needles clicking like tiny swords. Jack removed his gloves, laid them on the porch rail. "Who? Don't play dumb with me." "Jackson Holloway. That Mayfield girl. People talk, and they're talking loud." Jack sat heavily in the chair beside her, the same chair his father used to occupy, watching sunsets and planning tomorrow's work. "What exactly are they saying?" Martha's hands clenched around her knitting. "That you're courting a woman of ill repute, that you've forgotten your place, forgotten your raising. And what do you say?" His mother finally looked at him, blue eyes blazing with anger and fear. "I say she's not fit. She's not one of us. You bring her near this house. You shame your father's grave. You shame mine." Jack's face darkened. The words cut deep because they came from the woman who'd raised him to be honorable. But honor, he was learning, meant different things to different people. "This is my house now, Ma, my land, my choice." Martha's voice cracked like ice. "Your choice affects more than just you. What about children? Would you want your sons raised knowing their mother sang in saloons? Would you want your daughters treated the way people treat her?" The questions hung in the air like smoke. Jack had no answers. He'd barely admitted to himself that he cared for Clara, let alone imagined a future. But his mother's words planted seeds of doubt that would grow in the dark hours before dawn. For the next week, the town seemed to close its doors. At the blacksmith's, his tools were left behind the counter, unpolished, while other customers were served first. At the church, the pastor's greeting turned cold. "Jack, I trust you've been reflecting on your path lately?" The message was clear. Step back in line, or step outside the community entirely. Dr. Morrison, who delivered Jack and set his broken arm when he was 12, barely nodded when they passed on the street. Even children seemed to sense the change, giving him wider berths, watching with curious, wary eyes. One evening, Jack sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at a cold supper. The house felt larger and emptier than ever. Sarah's Bible still lay open on the sideboard where she'd left it. Her coffee cup still sat in the cabinet, too precious to use, too painful to put away. He thought about Clara, probably finishing her last set at the saloon. She'd sing something light to send the men home happy, then clean up and walk alone to the boarding house. Did she feel the town's judgment as keenly as he did, or had she grown used to being unwanted? The thought made his hands clench into fists. Clara Mayfield deserved better than Dustwood's scorn. She deserved better than sneaking around like criminals. If he was going to care for her, and God help him, he was beginning to then she deserved to be courted properly. But courting Clara properly would mean defying every social rule Dustwood held sacred. It would mean choosing love over acceptance. And Jack Holloway had never been a rebel. Until now, the next Saturday, the town gathered for a harvest dance. It was Dustwood's biggest social event, held in the church hall with decorations made by the ladies' auxiliary. Families came from miles around. Musicians tuned their fiddles. Women showed off their finest dresses. Young men worked up courage to ask for dances. Jack entered late, hat in hand, wearing his father's best coat. Conversations paused as he walked through the crowd. Eyes followed him like compass needles finding north. The music faltered, then resumed. Then Clara stepped through the door. She wore a dress of plain blue cotton, not silk, not stage finery. Her hair was tied back simply, no feathers or ribbons. She'd borrowed the dress from another girl at the boarding house, traded in evening's tips for the chance to attend like a normal person. But the moment she entered, normalcy shattered. The room froze. Fiddles fell silent. Eyes turned sharp as blades. Whispers erupted, louder than the music had been. What's she doing here? Doesn't she know her place? Someone should tell her this ain't the saloon. Mrs. Henderson grabbed her husband's arm. Pastor, you can't allow this. This is a church function. Pastor Henderson, a thin man with kind eyes and a weak backbone, shifted uncomfortably. Well, the Lord welcomes all sinners to repent. She's not here to repent, Mrs. Patterson snapped. She's here to corrupt our children. Clara heard every word, her chin lifted slightly, not defiance, but dignity refusing to bow. She'd known this would happen. She'd come anyway. Jack crossed the room in 3 strides. The crowd parted before him like he carried plague. He stopped in front of Clara, close enough to shield her from the worst of the stares. He offered his hand. Dance with me, Clara. Her lips trembled, but she nodded. Her fingers, work rough but gentle, slipped into his. Together they stepped onto the floor. The fiddles hesitated, then picked up again, uneven. But no other couple joined them. They danced alone, in a circle of silence. Jack led her through a simple waltz. She followed gracefully, as if she'd learned dancing in parlors, not saloons, which, of course, she had. But Dustwood didn't know that. Dustwood only saw what they expected to see. Halfway through the tune, a man shoved forward, broad shoulders, red face, drunk on both whiskey and righteousness. Tom Brennan, who ran a failing farm and blamed everyone but himself for his troubles. He pointed at Clara with a shaking finger. Look at her, a saloon whore in a church hall, prancing around like she's decent folk. Laughter erupted, cruel and sharp, from the corners of the room. Clara stiffened, tears burning behind her eyes. But she didn't break away from Jack's arms. Jack released her hand, turned to face Brennan. His voice was low, steady. You've said enough, Tom, Brennan sneered, emboldened by whiskey and the crowd's approval. Or what you'll fight for her shame. Defend a woman who spreads her legs for any man with coin? The words hung in the air like poison. Clara's face went white. Jack's vision narrowed to a red tunnel. His fist answered before words could. Brennan hit the floorboards hard, blood streaming from his nose. The hall gasped as one. Silence fell, heavy as stone. Jack stood over the fallen man, knuckles split and bleeding. His voice carried to every corner of the room. Clara Mayfield is a lady. Any man who says different answers to me. He turned back to Clara, took her hand again, raised her to her feet. His gaze swept the crowd, daring anyone to challenge. No one moved. No one spoke. But judgment filled the air thick as smoke. Dustwood had seen him choose, and Dustwood would not forget. The fiddles started again, hesitant. Jack led Clara through the rest of the dance. Other couples slowly, reluctantly, returned to the floor. But they kept their distance, as if scandal were contagious. When the music ended, Jack offered Clara his arm. They walked through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea. No one spoke to them. No one looked them in the eye. Outside, under the star-scattered sky, Clara's composure finally cracked. You shouldn't have done that. Her voice shook with unshed tears. Jack's knuckles still bled, but his voice was calm. I don't regret it. She looked at him with wonder and fear. They'll hate you for it. They'll never forgive you for choosing me over them. Jack met her gaze, steady as granite. Then let them hate. I'd rather stand with you than kneel with them. The words hung between them, a bridge across the chasm of their separate loneliness. Clara's walls, built by years of cruelty and disappointment, began to crack. Why? She whispered. Why would you risk everything for someone like me? Jack reached out, gently touched her face. Because you're not someone like you. You're you, and you're worth fighting for. In that moment, under Dustwood's judgment in the infinite prairie sky, something shifted. Not just affection or companionship. Love, raw and new and dangerous as wildfire. But love in Dustwood came at a price, and they were about to learn how steep that price could be. The town would not forget what they'd witnessed. The man who chose shame over respectability, the woman who dared reach above her station, and Dustwood's revenge would be swift, merciless, and total. The days following the harvest dance were cold in more ways than one. October winds carried the bite of coming winter, and Dustwood's treatment of Jack and Clara carried the chill of absolute rejection. Ranch hands quit without explanation. Suppliers found reasons to delay deliveries. Even the doctor, who'd delivered Jack into the world, made excuses when the ranch foreman's son broke his arm. "I'm awful busy these days, Jack. Try the doc over in Millfield. Here he's taking new patients." Jack drove 16 miles to get the boy treated. The message was clear. Choose Clara, lose Dustwood. There would be no middle ground. Clara felt the weight of his sacrifice. Every cold shoulder he received, every friend who turned away, pressed down on her like stones. She'd expected the town's hatred that was nothing new, but watching Jack pay the price for defending her was agony. She found him one evening, mending harness by lamplight in his barn. "Jack and I need to talk to you." He looked up from the leather straps, saw the pain in her dark eyes. "What is it?" Clara's hands twisted together. She'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times, but the words still came hard. "I've been thinking about what happened at the dance, what it's cost you." Jack set down his tools, gave her his full attention. "Go on. You've lost friends, business, the town's respect." Her voice cracked. "All for me, and I can't bear it anymore." Jack stood slowly, fear creeping into his chest. "What are you saying?" Clara's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for days. "I'm saying maybe they're right. Maybe we don't belong together. Maybe I should leave Dustwood, let you rebuild what you've lost." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. In the weeks since the dance, he'd grown used to her presence in his life, her voice in his kitchen as she helped with supper, her laughter when he told stories about ornery cattle, her quiet strength when the loneliness threatened to swallow him whole. The thought of losing her, of returning to the hollow existence he'd known before, was unbearable. "No." The word came out sharp, final. Clara blinked in surprise. "No," Jack repeated, stepping closer. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for Dustwood's approval, and I won't let them drive you away. But your reputation, your place in the community, is worth nothing if I have to give up the woman I love to keep it." The words hung in the air between them. Clara's breath caught. It was the first time either of them had spoken the word aloud. Love. Simple and complicated and dangerous as dynamite. "Jack," she whispered. He reached for her hands, calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "I love you, Clara. Not because you sing like an angel, though you do. Not because you're beautiful, though you are. I love you because you're brave enough to keep singing when the world tells you to be quiet. Because you're strong enough to stand tall when they try to knock you down." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm not brave. I'm scared all the time. Being scared doesn't make you weak. Doing what's right, despite being scared, that's courage. And you're the most courageous person I know." Clara leaned into him, breathing in the scent of leather and hay and honest work. For the first time in years, and she felt safe. Not just protected, but truly safe, as if she'd found harbor after a lifetime at sea. "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "But loving you might destroy you." Jack's arms tightened around her. "Then we'll face destruction together. Because I'd rather be ruined with you than whole without you." Their first kiss tasted of salt tears and sweet promises. In the golden lamplight of the barn, surrounded by the honest smell of horses and hay, Jack Holloway and Clara Mayfield sealed their fate. The town could whisper all it wanted. They had found something worth fighting for. But Dustwood wasn't finished with them yet. 3 days later, the Red Vultures rode in. The attack came at sunset on a Tuesday. Most folks were finishing supper, children playing in dusty yards, merchants closing their shops for the night. The first sign of trouble was the thunder of hooves on hard-packed earth. Then came the war cries, the gunfire, the acrid smell of smoke. The Red Vultures hit Dustwood like a summer storm, sudden, violent, and devastating. 10 men in red bandanas, faces painted with clay and charcoal. They weren't ordinary bandits looking for bank money. They were chaos incarnate, riding for the pure joy of destruction. Their leader, a man called Scarface Pete for obvious reasons, had been planning this raid for months. Dustwood was isolated, poorly defended, ripe for the picking. The sheriff was old and arthritic. Most of the younger men had moved on to bigger towns with better prospects. It should have been easy. They lit torches and threw them into buildings. The general store burst into flames first. Mrs. Patterson's carefully arranged displays becoming fuel for destruction. The blacksmith shop followed, bellows catching fire, horseshoes glowing red-hot in the inferno. Men ran for their guns, women screamed for their children. Chaos ruled the streets. Clara was walking home from the saloon when she heard the first shots. She turned to see flames licking at the church steeple, smoke beginning to pour from the windows. Her blood turned to ice. Sunday school had been meeting late, practicing songs for the harvest festival. A dozen children, maybe more, trapped inside as fire climbed the wooden walls. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She ran toward the flames. Clara, no. Big Tom Murphy grabbed for her arm, but she twisted away. The children, she shouted back. They're still inside. Jack heard the gunshots from his ranch 3 miles out. He saw the orange glow painting the night sky and knew Dustwood was burning. He saddled his fastest horse, grabbed his rifle, and rode hard toward town. By the time he arrived, half the main street was ablaze. Men fought the Red Vultures with whatever weapons they could find. Samuel Granger had taken a bullet in the shoulder but kept firing. Pastor Henderson wielded a shotgun like an avenging angel. Even old Mrs. Patterson stood on her porch with a derringer, daring anyone to come near. But Jack's eyes found Clara immediately. She was inside the burning church, leading a line of coughing, crying children toward the back door. Smoke poured around them like fog. Flames ate at the roof beams above their heads. Jack's heart stopped. The woman he loved was walking into hell to save children whose parents despised her. He dismounted and ran toward the church. A red vulture wheeled his horse around, pistol aimed at Jack's chest. Jack's rifle barked once. The outlaw toppled backward, hitting the ground hard. Inside the church, Clara counted heads. 11 children, ages 6 to 14. The youngest, little Mary Patterson, clung to her skirts and sobbed. The oldest, Tom Henderson Jr., tried to be brave, but his eyes were white with terror. Listen to me, Clara said, her voice calm despite the chaos. We're going to walk out together. Stay low. Hold hands. Don't let go. A burning beam creaked ominously overhead. Clara looked up and saw death preparing to fall. She pushed Mary and 2 other small ones toward the door, just as the beam came crashing down. It caught her across the left shoulder and arm. Pain exploded through her body like lightning. The smell of burning cloth and skin filled the air, but she didn't scream, didn't fall. Go, she gasped to the remaining children. Move! Jack burst through the back door as Clara herded the last group of children outside. Her dress was smoking. Her left arm hung at an odd angle, but her eyes blazed with fierce determination. Jack Tom Henderson Jr. called out, Miss Clara saved us. She saved all of us. Jack reached Clara just as her knees buckled. He caught her in his arms, felt her weight against his chest. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale with shock and pain. The children, she whispered. Are they? They're safe, Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. All of them, because of you. Around them, Dustwood burned. But something else was burning too. The rigid walls of prejudice that had kept the town locked in fear and hatred. Dr. Morrison appeared, black bag in hand. The same doctor who'd refused to treat Jack's ranch hand now knelt beside Clara without hesitation. Let me see that arm, miss. As he worked, setting bones and treating burns, other townspeople gathered. Mrs. Patterson pushed through the crowd, her face streaked with tears and soot. Clara, she said, her voice breaking. My Mary, you saved my Mary. Clara tried to sit up, but Jack's gentle hand kept her still. Anyone would have done the same. No. Mrs. Patterson shook her head. Anyone wouldn't have. But you did. Pastor Henderson appeared, his youngest son Tommy clinging to his leg. The preacher's face was grim, but his eyes held something new. Miss Mayfield, he said formally, I owe you a debt I can never repay. One by one, and the parents of the rescued children came forward. Men who had spat at her feet now removed their hats. Women who had crossed the street to avoid her now knelt beside her with offers of help. The fire still raged, but the tide had turned against the Red Vultures. Jack stood, rifle in hand, and joined the defense of Dustwood. His shots were steady and true. Each bullet found its mark. By midnight, the outlaws were dead or fled. The fires were contained, though much of Main Street lay in ruins. And Clara Mayfield, the woman they had scorned, was being hailed as the hero of Dustwood. Dr. Morrison finished binding her wounds. "You'll heal," he said gruffly. "But that arm's going to pain you for a while." Clara nodded, exhaustion weighing on her like lead. But there was something else in her eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. Hope. Mrs. Henderson, the pastor's wife, appeared with a clean dress and gentle hands. "Come, dear," she said softly. "Let's get you cleaned up and proper." The word dear hung in the air like a benediction. Clara looked up in wonder. "Mrs. Henderson, I don't understand." The older woman's eyes were kind. "You risked your life for our children. That tells us more about your character than any amount of gossip ever could." As dawn broke over the wounded town, Jack found Clara sitting on the church steps. The building behind her was blackened and broken, but still standing, like Dustwood itself, like both of them. "How do you feel?" he asked, settling beside her. Clara flexed her bandaged arm, wincing slightly. "Sore, but different." "Different how?" She looked around at the townspeople working together to clear debris and tend the wounded. Samuel Granger nodded respectfully as he passed. Mrs. Patterson waved from across the street. Children who had once been warned away from her now smiled and called her name. "For the first time since I came to Dustwood," Clara said softly, "I feel like I belong." Jack took her good hand in his. "You've always belonged. They just needed to see what I saw from the beginning." "And what's that?" Jack's gray eyes were warm as summer rain. "A woman worth fighting for. A woman worth loving. A woman who saves children at the risk of her own life." Clara leaned against his shoulder, careful of her injuries. "What happens now?" Jack was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun climb higher over the prairie. "Now," he said finally, "we rebuild. The town, our lives, everything. Together. If you'll have me." Clara's answer was a kiss, soft and sweet and full of promise. Around them, Dustwood began the slow work of healing. But for Jack Holloway and Clara Mayfield, the healing had already begun. In epilogue, love overcomes all 6 months later. Dustwood hosted another dance. This time, it was a wedding celebration. The new church was smaller than the old one, built with donated lumber and volunteer labor. But it was beautiful in its simplicity, with windows that caught the morning light and threw rainbows on the walls. Clara walked down the aisle in white linen, simple but radiant. Her left arm still bore scars from the fire, but she wore them like badges of honor. Jack waited at the altar in his father's good suit, eyes bright with joy. The church was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls. Children Clara had saved sat in the front row, scrubbed clean and beaming. Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Even Martha Holloway, Jack's stern mother, managed a small smile. Pastor Henderson performed the ceremony, his voice strong and sure. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness something beautiful, the union of two souls who have proven that love can overcome any obstacle." When Jack slipped the ring onto Clara's finger, his voice carried across the hushed church. "I choose you, Clara, today, tomorrow, always." Clara's vows were simple but profound. "I was lost in darkness. You became my light. I was alone in the world. You became my home." When Pastor Henderson pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers. Not polite applause, but genuine celebration. Dustwood had learned to love what they had once scorned. At the reception, held in the newly rebuilt community hall, Clara sang again, not the sad songs of her saloon days, but joyful hymns and folk tunes. Her voice soared clear and true, filled with the happiness she'd thought she'd never find. Samuel Granger approached Jack during the dancing. The two men had slowly rebuilt their friendship over the winter months. "I owe you an apology," Samuel said quietly. "I was wrong about her. About both of you." Jack clapped his old friend on the shoulder. "You were protecting me the only way you knew how. I can't fault a man for that." She's good for you, Samuel continued. Anyone can see it. You're the man you used to be. Before. Before the sadness took hold. It was true, and Jack carried himself differently now. His shoulders were straighter. His smile came easier. The hollow look that had haunted his eyes for 4 years was gone, replaced by contentment and purpose. Clara had changed too. Gone was the defensive posture, the expectation of cruelty. She walked through Dustwood with her head high, secure in the knowledge that she was valued and loved. The general store that Mrs. Patterson rebuilt was bigger than before, and Clara Holloway was welcomed there like any other customer. Not just tolerated, but genuinely welcomed. At the schoolhouse, children who had once been warned away from her now ran to greet her on the street. Mrs. Holloway, Mrs. Holloway, will you sing for us? And she would, right there on the dusty road, her voice carrying across the prairie wind. The Red Vulture attack had changed Dustwood in ways that went far beyond the physical reconstruction. It had forced the town to confront its own capacity for both cruelty and redemption. They had seen what really mattered when everything else burned away. Not reputation, not social standing, but courage, compassion, and love. 1 year later, Jack and Clara welcomed their first child, a daughter with Jack's gray eyes and Clara's dark hair. They named her Sarah Hope Holloway, Sarah for Jack's first wife, who would always hold a place in his heart. Hope for the future they were building together. Martha Holloway, now a doting grandmother, held the baby with tears in her eyes. She's beautiful, she whispered. Just beautiful. Clara, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at her mother-in-law. Would you like to hold her a little longer? Martha nodded, rocking the baby gently. You know, she said quietly, I was wrong about you. I let fear and pride blind me to who you really were. Clara reached out and squeezed the older woman's hand. We all make mistakes. What matters is how we heal from them. Outside, Dustwood thrived under the summer sun. The town had grown, attracting new families drawn by stories of a community that had learned to value character over circumstance. The main street bustled with activity. Children played in the dust. Merchants called out their wares. Life continued, richer and fuller than before. But at the Holloway Ranch, in the quiet moments between sunset and full dark, Jack and Clara often sat on their porch and marveled at how far they'd come. Do you ever regret it? Clara asked one evening, baby Sarah sleeping peacefully in her arms. Choosing me over Dustwood's approval. Jack pulled her closer, careful not to wake their daughter. Never. Not for a single moment. Even when it cost you everything? Jack's voice was soft but certain. It didn't cost me everything. It gave me everything. You, Sarah, a purpose bigger than just surviving each day. Clara looked out at the prairie, vast and endless under the star-filled sky. I used to think love was weakness, something that made people vulnerable, easy to hurt. And now, she smiled, thinking of the children she'd saved, the town that had learned to accept her, the man who'd fought the world for the right to love her. Now I know love is the strongest thing there is, strong enough to change hearts, strong enough to rebuild towns, strong enough to make broken people whole again. Jack kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. Strong enough to overcome shame. Clara's smile widened. Love overcomes everything, Jack Holloway. Everything. And in that moment, under the infinite prairie sky, with their daughter sleeping peacefully between them, Jack and Clara Holloway knew she was right. Love had won, not easily, not without cost, but completely and finally. Dustwood had learned that lesson too, and the town was better for it, stronger, kinder, more complete. Because sometimes the most beautiful stories begin not with perfection, but with broken people finding each other in the darkness and choosing to build something beautiful together. Sometimes love really does overcome all, and that was today's story from the dusty streets of Dustwood, a reminder that in the harsh frontier, judgment was heavy, but love could be heavier still. Jack Holloway and Clara Mayfield proved that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in facing down outlaws or fighting fires, but in choosing to love someone the world tells you isn't worth loving. What do you think? Would you have stood against a whole town for the one you love? Tell us in the comments. We read every thought you share. If this story struck a chord, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because here on WestDream Tales, every week we bring you more forgotten legends from the Old West where bullets missed, but hearts did not.